This place is deader than my art channel. Hello old-timers and newcomers. I am Cole Scratches, and I am sorry for it taking this long to finally get this video out. Working night 5 days a week is exhausting. I didn't like the first script, so I had to rewrite it. I was asked to house it, and they may or may not have had a PS5, which I may or may not have been glued to for 72 hours. Not professional, I know. But I am back, I feel rested, and I am ready to finally get this done. Now let me ask you a question. Did you know I'm a contrarian who hates everything that's popular on principle? It's not true. But some people have called me on it because there are a number of popular things that I simply don't like. Case in point, Ghostbusters. No, I don't like the Ghostbusters. Fucking sue me. I can't speak too much on it because I've only seen the first film once, a few years ago, but I mostly found it grinding. I couldn't stand Bill Murray's character, and the jokes were pretty unfunny, and god damn, it's an ugly movie. I did enjoy Afterlife. I managed to grab an early showing of it on Halloween. But aside from a lot of fan service, it didn't really remind of Ghostbusters at all. It was more like a Steven Spielberg film. I get why people like it. It's not my type of humor, but it has kind of a self-aware irony about it. It knows it's pretty dumb, but it rolls with it. And it is thoroughly American. It is a charming jackass oppressed by the establishment, leading his group of friends towards success and betterment for the world. It's basically a more escapist version of Citizen Kane. But I do think the biggest reason people like it is nostalgia. It's a film they grew up with, and so they love it. So maybe the reason I don't like it is because it's not a film that I grew up with. What I grew up with was Poltergeist. This is my premise, my original sin, my loss of innocence, my flowery language for beginning, my... well, I guess it all started when I saw The Exorcist when I was 5. I don't know if it's the first horror movie I ever saw, but it's the one I remember. Whatever came before this was blah and unimportant. This is when I felt fear for the first time. This is when I was first spellbound. This is when a movie made me unable to sleep alone. This is when death and horror became a fascination my mother could never starve out of me. By which I mean, she didn't let me watch horror movies, not that she literally starved me. Clearly. Anyway. As a kid, to me, it was really just a scary, awesome film. But looking back on it as an adult, there are a lot of layers to this movie that I never picked up on as a kid, which only made me appreciate it more as an adult than I did as a kid. So, yes, maybe the reason I don't like Ghostbusters is that I never saw it as a kid. I'll tell you right now, I am anything but impartial about this movie. So, I thought, with Halloween falling on a Sunday this year, I could make it a Halloween special to talk about this movie and see what made it such a masterpiece. Just ignore the fact that it's now November 21st. And don't ask what I've planned for my 100 subscriber special. I got nothing. Ghost stories are generally existential, raising questions about life and death and what the point of being is. Which is what makes ghosts fun, in my opinion. If life goes on, then what should we do while we're here? What comes after? What's the point of anything we do? And how big a deal is it really if I commit a few murders? You have literally all of eternity to get over it. Poltergeist is much more grounded in its horror. It doesn't so much fill you with an existential dread about the everlasting, as it threatens everything near and dear to you. The premise is the abduction of a little girl and the family's desperation to get her back. That is a very real, palpable horror, and most of the threat the family is put under is very physical, as well as filled with quite a bit of subtext. But now I'm putting the cart before the horse. Let's have the movie speak for itself. In the 1900s, American TV and radio stations would end the night's broadcast with a sign-off, because this was a time when radio and TV didn't run for 24 hours a day. They stopped broadcasting when a majority of people had gone to bed. And because it was the Reagan years of 1980s America, the idea of American exceptionalism was still alive and thriving. The movie opens to the main credits of the film, briefly interrupting a pitch-black background set to the movement of the Star-Spangled Banner. You're left staring into this empty void where nothing exists but the preamble of horror. It's how one might imagine death as the absence of life, before the chilling dark is covered by monuments symbolic of America as the greatest country on earth. But as the movement ends and the broadcast ceases, all that remains is empty static. I never put too much thought into this opening as a kid, aside from thinking it was kind of long. But I've come to realize that it foreshadows the underlying theme of the movie. Waking up from the American dream. As the camera pans away, we find Stephen Freeling, the man of the house, having long since fallen asleep in front of the TV, and then we're taken on a quick tour of the house by a slightly unusual vehicle, the dog. I'm not sure why it's running around from room to room in the middle of the night, and why he visits every family member without waking them up, but it's Spielberg. I'd be more surprised if the animals didn't feel magical in some way. And it works for what's intended, showing the normalcy of this family. When I say normalcy, what I mean is how conservative they are. Keep in mind this was 1980s America, but that's the point. This is what normal or ideal looked like back then. In fact, all of them are so normal, it's almost boring. Except for one. Carol Ann, played by Heather O'Rourke. Before she says or does a thing, you immediately know something is off about her, and it's entirely down to the set dressing. But having a fairly creepy orchestral score helps as well. I would play you some of it, but last time I did that the video got demonetized. Or it would have been if it was monetized to begin with. I'll say right now, I love the art direction in this film, because it lets every scene convey so much without a bunch of awkward exposition. Kind of like what I'm doing right now. Irony! The parents' room is all soft and creamy, the oldest daughter's room is hard and angular, the young boy's side of the room is a chaotic mess of soft blues, and then there is Carol Ann. The pale blue light against the white and pink of her bedspread is just eerie to look at. It's much more ordered, with less things cluttering the scene, so it feels less lively than the other rooms. And most obviously, the swirling Art Nouveau sunrise headboard looks beautiful in daylight, but right now that's a frickin' human skeleton. The entire scene is just ghastly to look at, and placing that little girl at the center of it, you know she is integral to it. Little details like that makes up the entire film, and I love that. And I love Carol Ann. She, when asked why they don't want kids, a lot of people will answer, because I watch horror movies. Some people have Damien from Omen, others have the Home Alone kid from Home Alone. Me? I think I'd avoid having kids because they wouldn't be Carol Ann. Like the rest of the film, Carol Ann feels very real, as well as uncanny. But it's not because she does anything all that strange, it's because she herself is strange. For good reason. When she wakes up, it's as if she hears something in the distance, and she makes her way downstairs, transfixed by the blaring white noise of the TV screen. She settles down so close she could reach out and touch it, and then, as if there is someone there, she begins to talk to it.
5. Yes. Yes.
What I like about this is from a realistic adult perspective. Yes, it is very creepy how she talks to the TV as if someone is interrogating her. But it is also easily dismissed as a simple case of sleepwalking, which is exactly what her mother and father thinks it is. And the next 30 minutes don't offer any reason to think it was anything else. We find our characters living in a beautiful homely neighborhood set among the rolling hills of California, fittingly scored to the tune of The Neighborhood by Jerry Goldsmith. God damn the Content ID bot! The neighborhood of Cuesta Verde is a suburban utopia that epitomizes the humble Rockwellian culture America once prided itself on. It's a safe place for families to grow and community to thrive, where one's biggest problem is bringing the beer for when the football game is on. This was a medieval time before streaming services, internet providers, and politicizing every personal grievance on Twitter. This was a time when crushed testicles was nothing to cry about. This was a time when you couldn't pause the TV, and changing channels with a remote was a power move.
Move your sack.
Move yours back.
Cuesta Verde is the kind of place where bad things don't happen. It's a calm, quiet neighborhood that embodies the ideal American way of life. Upper middle class earned through hard work and humble dreams. The one thing I'd argue as maybe worth some concern is the literal death of the canary.
Oh.
Oh, shit. Tweety, couldn't you have waited for school day?
Just because it's symbolic of the danger they're in. But there is something interesting going on in the scene. Their reaction to it. The only one to treat it like a loss is Carol Ann, who catches her mother about to flush Tweety down the toilet and insists they give him a proper funeral. But she doesn't seem to understand death the same way her family does. She doesn't seem to think Tweety is dead, but gone away someplace she's not sure when he'll come back from. With him she places a bit of licorice for when he's hungry, a picture of the family for when he's lonely, and a blanket for when he goes to bed. Meanwhile, her older sister Dana mocks her for putting so much effort into burying a bird, and her brother Robbie asks if they can dig it up later to see the bones. Everyone seems to agree that when a person is dead, they're dead. It's as if they never existed in the first place, and you don't need to be concerned about them. You may have treasured them in life, but you don't need to be concerned about them anymore. You certainly don't need to respect them. I mean, what are they gonna do? Rise up? The point is, Carol Ann seems to be the only one with a sense of respect towards the dead.
Am I a goldfish now?
Okay, she undermines my point a little bit, but if you were a kid and you saw an opportunity to ask your parents for another pet, wouldn't you? By the way, Heather O'Rourke really did get to keep the goldfish Carol Ann was given in the movie, so that's neat. But there are other characters in the movie. It's just a bit difficult to talk about them because they're less unique than Carol Ann. Their strength doesn't lie in their individuality, but how the events come to affect them. Robbie, played by Oliver Robbins, has trouble sleeping at night, and it's easy to see why. The world is a scary place in the dark, and the coming storm isn't making things any better. Whether it's the horrid tree looming outside the window like a monster, or the world's most harrowing clown doll watching him sleep, these are all fears that are easy to understand. In fact, both the tree and clowns are things that scared Spielberg when he was Robbie's age. They are fears you understand are unjustified because you grow up to realize they're harmless, but they're nevertheless real at the time. And while Robbie is a fairly bland character, I can't badmouth Robin's acting, nor anyone else's acting, because despite being so bland, they do feel like real people. Another thing I never noticed as a kid, this hardcore conservative household of white people surfing an economic boom consists of pot-smoking hippies. Remember kids, today you're rebels, tomorrow you're the establishment. Not that it makes a difference to Robbie, all he wants is for his dad to comfort him. So Stephen, played by Craig Nelson, puts him back to bed and tries to assuage his worries about the tree.
Knows everything about us, Rob. That's why I built a house next to it, so it could protect us.
Which is another thing that I love about this movie. All of the horror is foreshadowed for the dialogue, but it's never contrived and it never feels out of place, so you don't notice it until you watch the movie again. And Stephen assuring his son that the tree will protect him isn't just ironic, it ties in with the theme of the movie, where he tells his son that whatever concerns he have are unfounded. He teaches Robbie to count between the flash and thunder, so he can tell the storm is moving further away from them. Not that it helps, as Robbie and Carol Ann both crawl into Stephen and Diane's bed anyway, lulled to sleep by the assuring movement of the Star-Spangled Banner as the TV set wishes them a good night. It's time. Yeah, you know what's coming. Even people who haven't seen this movie knows this bit. What you perhaps don't know is when the TV first turns over, it reads 2:37 on the clock, referencing room 237 from The Shining, as if to say, this is where the horror starts. A lot of people may not remember the details surrounding it, but we all know the line. As the spirits penetrate the mortar and plaster, shaking the building as they settle into their new home, Carol Ann turns to her startled family and says,
They're here.
I don't know what it is about that scene that makes me want to hug the box, it just does! I especially like how, when the first 20 minutes of the film went out of its way to discredit all the minor signs the house is haunted, when the haunting really begins, it's pretty damn overt about it. Glass breaks for no reason, cutlery are twisted into twizzlers, and then there is of course the chair thing. Why? 'Cause ghosts! I make fun of it, but honestly, I love this scene. It makes no sense, it's more funny than harrowing, but it's so unexpected and quick, I don't know how anyone sees it for the first time and doesn't become entranced. It's the perfect way of revealing the haunting without immediately making it threatening, and the way it's done is kind of magic. As the camera pans away, a crew of stage workers quietly rushes in, scoops up the chairs, and places a glued stack of chairs on the table, all without making a sound in less than 5 seconds. That's some impressive sleight of hand. When the camera pans, you can see one of them accidentally rustling the plant in the corner, but in my headcanon that's just ripples from the ghostly force as it moves through the ether. Incidentally, that's how I explain most cases of ghosts doing random things, like throwing cups or slamming lockers, an unintended consequence of a metamaterial being lashing out and getting caught on things. Don't look at me like that. We're talking about ghosts. Have some imagination! This is as good a time as any to talk about the underlying theme of the movie. As Diane explores this sudden paranormal presence in their lives, Stephen works to make another sale. He's an estate agent, and quite a successful one, having populated almost half of the buildings in Cuesta Verde, and the company he works for in turn is responsible for building the entire neighborhood.
Where do you live, Mr. Freeling?
Well, you know, actually, we were the first family to set up housekeeping in the Cuesta Verde estates.
Honey, I can't tell one house from the other.
Well, you know something? I think you're right. But I think our construction standards are really very liberal.
Did I mention the dialogue is full of subtle foreshadowing and clues to what's going on? Now, I am a perverted, godless European. I am not qualified to teach anyone about America. But, as I've understood it, the American dream is the idea that if you're willing to work hard and seize opportunity, then you will have earned a good life for yourself and for your family, without consequence and free of oppression, as is your God-given right in the land of the free. And it is a nice thought. The idea that anyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and overcome any obstacle if they're just willing to go for it. Problem is, that feeling of entitlement usually motivates people to do what they can without contemplating whether or not they should. When he gets home, Diane almost drags the shocked Stephen into the house, positively beside herself to show what she's discovered. The kitchen now looks like an NCAP testing area, with targets and directions and notes on the floor, and Diane begs Stephen to keep an open mind for what's about to happen. Which is done with the least impressive trick in the Ghostmaker's handbook, invisible wire. As a kid, I thought they went the extra mile and used magnets under the floor. I'm disappointed. It's slightly more impressive when Carol Ann does it, mostly because I wonder where they put the wire, but it nevertheless leaves Stephen in a state of shock because this is not something he's familiar with. This is beyond his sense of control, and he doesn't like it. Diane is fascinated, in fact she's ecstatic about it, to have this strange phenomenon inside her house, to live this close to magic and wonder, but... Remember that thing where Stephen taught Robbie to count how far away the storm is?
1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000.
And this is where 6-year-old me decided he wasn't gonna sleep alone for a week. Or leave the house. Everything about this scene is horrifying, from the suddenness of it to how unexpected it is to the simplicity of it. It's a giant monster breaking through the window, but it's more real than a werewolf or a mutant or whatever. It's one you can imagine yourself reaching out and touch and know what it feels like. It's a freaking tree, they exist! And watching it as a kid, especially before fantasy and wonder has been beaten out of you, when you still worry about monsters in your closet and ghosts in your attic and faces in your windows and spiders in your bedspread, the thought of a tree possessed by evil spirits reaching through your window to eat you hits surprisingly close to home. What surprised me the most researching this film was that when Joe Haldeman was approached to novelize the film, he criticized this scene, saying it sucked eggs and wasn't scary. Fuck you! I lay awake for days, imagining bark cutting into my skin and branches gripping me and the creaking of wood as I was crushed by the trunk closing in around me. Further on, look at this thing as it enters the room. Sure, the tree having hands looks a bit silly, but just look at the way this thing fills up the room and tell me it doesn't look terrifying. And what's it planning to do with the kid? It's planning to eat him! It's so simple, so obvious, and so easy to understand. The fact that it's a tree is irrelevant. It remains one of the most awful ways to die, and for all of this to happen to a little child is its own special brand of scarring. Even if you're not watching it as a kid, it's been built up from the start of the movie. The first time we see the tree, Robbie is climbing it in the sunshine, and it's the most unremarkable thing in the world. But as night comes and the storm rages outside, it becomes a figure of horror before a thing even happens. And what did Stephen promise? What did Daddy Dearest say? That there is nothing to worry about, that the tree is harmless. Hell, he said the tree would protect them, and for all of that to be proven wrong isn't just terrifying, it feels like a betrayal. So, yes, I absolutely love this scene. But it also highlights one of the problems with the film. While the rest of the family is distracted by the tree, Carol Ann is left alone and unprotected in her bed. Why she did not flee for her life, I have no idea, but she's there, she's alone, and that's when a bright light begins to shine from the closet, and everything in the room starts being pulled inside. It cuts between one scene and the other, but there's almost no progression between the cuts. At first, Stephen tries to climb the tree, then we cut to Carol Ann struggling against the force trying to pull her into the closet. It's really tense, it's heartbreaking to hear her scream for her mom, and 30 seconds later, Stephen is still trying to climb the tree, and it hasn't even begun to swallow Robbie yet. At first, I thought this was just poor editing, but the same thing happens in pretty much every single scary moment of the film. Hooper did not leave a single good clip on the cutting room floor. If there was a scary visual, he made sure to include it. Flow of the scene be damned. They are really good scenes, they are really good visuals, but Christ if they're not being chewed to pulp. And imagining the characters just staying where they are until the camera is back on them just makes the whole thing seem really awkward. By the way, Heather O'Rourke has to be the most badass child actress ever. A lot of film directors try to shield the kids from what kind of film they're in, using clever angles and editing. Famously, Danny Lloyd never knew he was in The Shining until he watched it years later. But with Carol Ann being central to the horror of the film, that wasn't really an option. She knew exactly what kind of film this was, and of all the horrible things she goes through, this was the only scene that scared her. When they realized she wasn't acting, that she really was afraid, everything stopped and Spielberg rushed the stage to comfort her, promising she would not have to shoot that scene again. Outside, a tornado suddenly appears, and just as Steve manages to pull Robbie out of the tree, the tornado picks up the tree and blows it away. I'm calling it. I don't think that tornado was in the script. I think it was added at the last minute to explain why it took so long for Stephen to climb the tree between scenes if he had to fight through the wind. However, it just makes it even more awkward because half the clips don't have any wind in them, and seriously, the tornado was strong enough to lift the tree but not the characters? I believe the tree was never supposed to go anywhere. I think it was just going to stop moving and let go of Robbie once Carol Ann was gone. Of course, I never thought about any of that as a kid. All I could think of was, if the tree was pulled up into the sky, it could fall down outside my window! An unsettling calm descends over the house as the ill will vanishes, and with it presence of mind returns to the family. Where is Carol Ann? They search the house top to bottom, cabinet to closet, under the beds, and even, horrible thought, the swimming pool that lies open like a sore in the backyard. In their panic, they forget about the traumatized little boy they just saved, leaving him to wander in a daze through the house, and he is the first to hear Carol Ann calling. Confused, unnerved, panicked, he screams for his mother to come, and when she does, he's in such a state he can't do more than scream for Carol Ann himself. And that's when she hears it. From the TV set. In the empty static from the TV speaker, Carol Ann is calling for her mother from inside the TV. And that concludes Act 1 of the movie, which would make this a very good place for an intermission.